today's video, we're going to take a look at 4.5, the zero product property. We still have to factor, but in these problems, you'll notice that there's an equal sign. Our first goal is to get each problem set equal to 0, and then we'll factor, and then we just take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. So go ahead and copy down the definition of the zero product property. If the quantity x plus a times the quantity x minus b is equal to 0, then x is equal to negative a and x is equal to positive b. Taking a look at example 1, let's start with x squared minus 5x is equal to 0. The first thing I notice is that there is an x term in both of these terms that could be factored out. If I factor out an x, I'm left with x times the quantity x minus 5. Now I take each factor, x and x minus 5, and I set them both equal to 0. Now to solve, I end up with x is equal to 0 and x is equal to positive 5. Those will be my two solutions. I can plug them back into the original equation. So to check, I'd plug them in. 0 squared minus 5 times 0, yep, that's going to equal 0. And then 5 squared minus 5 times 5, well, that's equal to 25 minus 25, which indeed equals 0. So you don't need to check in your homework. It's just a proof that this is what zero product property does and gives you. Let's take a look at example 2. So in example 2, 2x squared plus 11x is equal to 6. 2x squared plus 11x is equal to 6. You cannot use a zero product property until you have an equation set equal to 0. So our first step is to subtract the 6 on both sides. Now I'm going to factor 2x squared plus 11x minus 6. I can't factor anything out, so I think I'm going to have to do the big X. I'm going to drop the 11x down below. I'm going to slide these two terms together and multiply. So what are two numbers that would multiply to negative 12 but add up to positive 11? Well, how about if we tried 12x and negative 1x? Sure enough, those would multiply to negative 12x squared but add up to positive 11x. Then drop down your first term and your last term, and then we factor by grouping. Out of the first group, I could factor out a 2 and an x, and I'd be left with x plus 6. In my second group, I'm going to factor out a negative 1, and that changes the signs, and I'm left with x plus 6. Now, I know I've done this correctly because I end up with the same factor in both groups. So this factors to x plus 6 times 2x minus 1, and then now it's time to bring back the equal 0 and solve. Now a little zero product property will help us solve. Again, it was x plus 6 times 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, just rewriting. Set each factor equal to 0. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve. This would be x equals negative 6. What would the second solution be? As you can see from my math, x equals 1/2. So my final answer is going to be x equals negative 6 and comma 1/2. All right, in example 3, we're going to kind of work backwards. So as you can see in example 3, if I can scroll down a smidge, in example 3, we're going to start with two solutions and write a quadratic equation. So we're going to totally work backwards. X equals 4 and x equals negative 2/3 are the solutions that we came up with. So to write a quadratic equation, check this out. I'm going to convert this to something that was a factor. I'm going to convert this to a factor. I'm going to do the same thing here. I want to set this equal to 0, and then I can kind of think of that as a factor. Well, the first thing I'm going to do to get it equal to 0 is subtract 4. So now I have x minus 4 is equal to 0. Over here, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 to start us off. And then the next step would be to add 2 and add 2. So this was 3x plus 2 before it was solved for 0, blah, blah, blah. All right, so my quadratic equation now, those two solutions came from x minus 4 times 3x plus 2. It's an equation, so I'm going to keep it set equal to 0. And then I'm going to FOIL. So 3x squared plus 2x. Inners would be minus 12x and then minus 8, still equal to 0. Combine your like terms. 3x squared minus 10x minus 8 is equal to 0. And that's my answer for that problem. So what I did in example 3 was I just worked backwards. I took my solutions and came up with my quadratic function, or my quadratic equation rather. In the first two examples, I was given a quadratic equation set equal to 0, and I factored it to come up with my solutions. Remember that what makes a quadratic is you have an x squared somewhere in the problem. Another big thing to take away from today's lesson is that you can't use the zero product property unless you have your equation set equal to 0. So the very first thing you should always do is set your equation equal to 0. All right, I'll see you later.